All right, you happily miserable accursed. The Ontario election is over. We're back to our mostly regular focus on federal politics, regular weekly format, regular recording time, and nothing regular about it. Best political panel out there. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and Kory, three-time majority Teneycke, who returns to us after more than a month of wandering the province. Kory, welcome back, man.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Deb Hutton was superb sitting in that seat, but we clearly missed the shit out of both you and your intense grooming regimen. But here's the burning question. Was the 5 weeks not spent in our scintillating company worth it for one more seat?
I don't know. I'm going to say yes, but I did miss you guys a lot. And I got to say, even I was like, I'm not sure I should come back. Deb's so fucking great. I might like it better if she listened to her.
Well, especially now as we turn our attention federally. All right, here's today's rundown. We're going to let Kory take a little victory lap and dovetail that into a discussion about what comes next in Ontario politics. There's a battle underway for who can capture the strongest Canada positioning at the federal level. We'll break down what we're seeing out there. Our cursed clipping is Aaron Wary's piece at cbc.ca on Carney and Poilievre's dueling fiscal approaches. What would they spend on and what would they cut? And then it's the return of the ethereal Mr. Pinsent to call out for our hey yous. So, Kory, congratulations.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a little switcheroony, since I'm going to have you for a full hour this week on the Herle Burley. I'm going to let Jordan and Scott each ask you a question about the Ontario election. But I'm going to start first because I've got one.
Sure.
Which is, why are the PCs so dominant in Peel region?
Brampton's a big part of it. In terms of, where a lot of the bodies are, but and so dominant, I don't know. I think Brampton has a bit of vote for the winner element to the electorate there, and it looks like you're going to win. I think you see things cascade in your direction, and I think you've seen that at other levels of government and in other elections in the past. So I think there's a bit of that, but I think in this election, frankly, Patrick Brown was quite helpful as the mayor, and I think having Bonnie as the candidate was quite helpful in Brampton. There's Brampton is Shelbyville to Mississauga Springfield a little bit. There's like a neighboring town rivalry element to it all, also. But Mississauga itself, look, Bonnie was not a good candidate for Mississauga. She raised taxes there a bunch of times, and including almost 8%, I think, just before leaving to become leader. Not everybody was having a deep love affair with Bonnie Crombie in that city at the time. And, when they say all politics is local, well, that includes local politics. And I think that hurt them. I think we also did a shitload of advertising over the last year and a half there that ground them down more there than any other part of the province. But a combination of a bit of all those things.
Cool. Jordan, you got a question for the campaign manager?
Well, I guess my general question is I'm curious to know what surprised you most in terms of the result, but I'm also particularly curious about how you see things as they unfolded in Northern Ontario, because obviously you guys were coming for those NDP votes there, but generally speaking, the NDP was able to mostly hold off the attack. So I'm curious as to what your takeaways were, both on the element of surprise, what was different than you expected, but in general, also your take on Northern Ontario and what would have had to unfold differently.
Well, I was surprised to the degree that the NDP did not run a provincial campaign. They ran a series of incumbent defend your seat campaigns. And, if you look at the numbers in Northern Ontario, they went down 7-8 points next to a riding that they went up by 7 or 8 points. And the amount of focus that they had on local campaigns is to a greater degree than anything I've seen in any election I've worked in. And you saw that in the Niagara region as well. You saw that across the province, like
Oshawa.
Yeah, it's I think they pursued a very smart strategy from a campaign's perspective. They knew they didn't have the horses in terms of the overall provincial numbers, and I think they just they dug in on those local seats, and they were able to basically maintain them all, not quite perfectly, but almost perfectly. But against in an election where they lost, I don't know, 500,000 votes. That's an achievement of itself. I think there's a long-term strategic problem with it. But in terms of getting the best outcome with the cards you have in your hand at the time, I think they definitely did very well in that respect. And I think it was a hyper-local, hyper-ground game strategy they pursued and relentlessly, clearly.
I would agree with that.
All right, Scott.
I'm curious. I'm curious about 100 different things about the election, but let me ask you something in contrast to other questions about the future. And you probably can't answer this because you're not the chief of staff to the premier, and we'll have to see how cards fall and what happens with tariffs on March 4th and beyond. But the dude asked for a mandate, and he got a mandate. What the fuck's he going to do with the mandate? And I keep asking people this. I mean, like, specifically, like, honest to Pete, like, does he recall the legislature right away and say, you know what, we need a rescue package for workers in industry, and I set aside some money in my platform, and I'm going to add to that now and detail that, and we got to fortify ourselves? What does he do with all those EV investments, and are they all in jeopardy, or how do you salvage them or not? Like, it's just like, he asked for a mandate, he's got the mandate. Dog caught the car. What are you going to do with it?
Well, we did actually put out a platform, which encourage you to. I know it's very
you put it out with about 13 minutes left before polls closed. Did, and that's why I made reference to. You put a little slush fund in there. So, okay, what are you going to do with it?
Well, but I think it actually lays it out fairly well. But what do you do? It's a series of contingencies. Which is why, much to the disappointment of Deb and maybe some others, it's pretty difficult to cost out a bunch of things that you might spend money on. But, what's laid out in there is a framework.
Donald Trump makes it impossible to price the tunnel.
Well, it hasn't been priced yet, but in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of response to tariffs, like, are you just facing tariffs on steel and aluminum? Are you facing a 5% across the board, or is it 25? Is it 5 going to 25 over the next 12 months? Like, there's, it's pretty hard to follow the bouncing ball on that one, because what Trump himself says he's going to do. A couple times during the campaign, it changed pretty radically over a 24-hour period. From we're having tariffs in the beginning of March to the beginning of April to back to the beginning of March to you really are not dealing with a highly predictable adversary in this particular fight. So I think flexibility is part of the reason why you need a mandate, because I think this thing is going to change and evolve in ways that are as unpredictable as Trump himself. That said, there are things that that I think the government's going to do, not just in Ontario, but I think across the country. But they are difficult things. Like, we have to protect ourselves from the United States in as many ways that we can that are proactive and within our control. And that means diversifying markets. That means building things a lot more quickly than we do right now. Talking about how we have all the critical minerals and all of these things that the world needs and that there's great markets for. It doesn't amount to a sweet fuck all if they're trapped under the ground and processed in China. So we need to get the Ring of Fire developed. And so how do you do that? Well, it's going to require things like First Nation equity investment. So there's a huge fund, platform to assist with that. there will be a process to speed up approvals. And I think, irrespective of who's in the federal government, I think C-69 and the federal impact assessments are going to be gone. Or be gone certainly in their current form, although the Supreme Court has mostly ripped them out. I think they'll be fully ripped out because the alternative of 10 years to a maybe on resource development is not working for Canada. It's not working. And if we want to maintain things like healthcare, education in the way that we have grown accustomed to, we've got to take that on. And this sort of perpetual NIMBY bullshit is over. It's over. And so is internal trade protections. And so, one of the other things you'll see in there is Ontario is going to unilaterally abandon any of the sort of internal protections that are annotated in the internal Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and is calling on all the other provinces to do the same. But we're not going to wait for them to do that. We're going to do it ourselves. So I think there are a bunch of things that we need to do. I think we need to have more pipelines to Tidewater on both coasts. I think there's you can go down the whole laundry list of all the things that Canada should have done 20 years ago, and we're going to either do them now or we're going to become accustomed to a lot lower standard of living. And I think it's just that simple.
All right. There you go. Scott, are you happy? It was a very substantive answer.
Yeah, no, not really. Because what I'm not looking for substance. I wanted, I'm just kidding. But what I'll just give you $2 worth of advice for zero, which is, it's not worth $2. It's not worth zero. I would recall the legislature quickly. Like, I think I would do a quickie recession legislature. I know it's not his style. I bring them back in the aftermath of all this. I'd say, here's a fiscal update. Here's all the challenges that we have. Here's what we're thinking. Pass some, some kind of Team Ontario commitments. Put everybody up against the wall. They have to vote in the same way for things that we're going to protect and stand up for. And, create a situation where you're highlighting the Bonnie's not in the House. Create a situation where the NDP is forced to stand in behind you. I just think I'd play some cards politically to consolidate your position. That's very tactical. It's not substantive. It's not thoughtful. It's not decent. But I'd dunk the ball.
I'll argue with you a little bit on that one. Like, I don't think there should be a budget until we know what we're facing on tariffs. If it's going to be,
that's why I said an update.
March or April. Like, I think. Well, look, we had a full update, and the finances have not substantially changed since then. But I think you want to know what you're facing, and then you want to go in with one budget, not go in and then redo the entire fucking thing and all your projections 2 weeks later when you might have to do it 2 weeks later. I think on that there's measure twice and cut once as opposed to the other way around. But that doesn't mean you do nothing, in terms of planning and communicating. But I think it's a time to actually bring the politics and down. We've just had a provincial election campaign. There was lots of time for politics then. I think we should be moving into a little bit more of a national unity sort of position. And I think we should get this federal election campaign. I know we're going to talk about that soon. Behind us sooner rather than later, so that we can get into a position of, more political stability and people with mandates to take on this fight in a sustained fashion and essentially determine who are the main players on the field going to be for the next 4 years, because we need to know, because this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy.
I'm struck by the degree to which the election was the easy part for Ford. All of this is so much harder. There's a reason these are intractable political problems.
Look, all that's totally. I'll just say one last thing. All that is totally sensible. Measure twice, cut once. And this applies not just provincially but federally. I think that if we think we can wait around, or not, and no one's saying wait around, but I think that if we believe that by summer, by fall, there'll be clarity with respect to Trump's intentions, his foreign policy, and his trade policy. I think we're whistling Dixie. This guy's going to continue to dangle yarn like a cat at us. I don't think there's going to be clarity coming from this guy. So at some point, we're just going to have to say we're going to budget and figure as best we can in the face of a gigantic ball of crazy.
Well, a lot of the budgeting is about things that you have to do to support the economy in response to tariffs, and so you can't just do that proactively. All the other stuff, I agree, you got to do proactively, and and look, there's legislation, things that are going to need to be drafted around some of these measures, but whether you kind of go over the top and write a sort of an emergency act for critical minerals or things like that overarches existing legislation regulation, or whether you're doing something from the ground up. There are different approaches one could pursue, but we're going to have to go through a regulatory harmonization and streamlining around large sections of our economy, three different levels of government. And we're going to have to do it like our economic lives depend on it, because frankly, they do.
I'm always chuffed to tell a Canadian business success story. Even more chuffed when that success is on a conspicuous upward trajectory and goes global. I've been talking about our presenting sponsor, Telus Health, here on the pod, a Canadian company now operating in 167 countries and still growing. Their mission is to deliver better health and well-being solutions through world-leading technology. Core to that mission, and a prime driver of all that growth, is the Telus Health Employee Assistance Program, or EAP for short. One of the largest providers in Canada, Telus Health EAP helps over 35 million people worldwide. It's an advanced digital platform backed by one of the largest networks of clinical expertise in the world. Employees can use it to access a range of support services, addressing aspects of mental health, well-being, and productivity, confidential counseling, crisis intervention for acute care, stress management, and other critical resources for personal and work-related issues. All of them available 24/7 to employees through their phone, online, and mobile applications, so they can get the personalized help they need whenever and wherever. And this is true. Healthier, happier employees beget healthier organizations and work environments, reduced absenteeism, more successful recruitment and retention, increased productivity, and overall workforce resilience. I began this piece underlining global success. It's hardly a coincidence. The platform is fully configurable, so employers can shape it to meet their team's needs all over the world. It adapts to support regional and cultural differences, can be accessed in different languages, and connects employees to global, regional, and local clinicians backed by dedicated practitioners on the ground. Pretty clear why Telus Health EAP has become an international pioneer and thought leader in the EAP industry. More next week. All right, you guys have been so serious, you make me feel bad about asking my next question, which is a silly, frivolous political question. Which is, which of the three Ontario leaders will contest the next Ontario election? And to give you time to think about your answers, I will start. And I will say that even though almost everything Doug Ford has achieved in Ontario politics was surprising in a way and increasingly precedent breaking, I still think it would be very surprising if he ran in the next election. 4 terms is going to be harder than 3 terms. And there is a time limit on these things eventually. There was a lot of undercurrent of things that could have gone badly for him had he not had the perfect frame for this election that he had. I'd be surprised, although not shocked, surprised if he ran again. The other 2, on the other hand, I think Stiles should get another chance. I think she's a good athlete. I think she was encumbered with a bad campaign, and as a party, they should think about that. And I think she needs to get better known, and she needs to get the anchor of Jagmeet Singh off her back. But she's good enough that I would give her another shot. And I would say the same for Crombie. I think Crombie achieved what she needed to achieve to merit staying on. 30% of the vote is a good threshold to have gotten back to. They've got official party status. She didn't have a long time to get ready. They don't have money. They'll have more money now. They'll have a professionalized operation because of official party status. I say she gets another shot too. Scott, what about you?
I think I agree with you all the way down. I'll add 2 asterisks to what you said. So fundamentally, I agree with all three conclusions. This will be something that's impossible for Kory to reply to. So I apologize. I don't mean to be the awkward guest at the dinner party. This is going to turn into be like a Zelensky-Trump summit. I think that Ford will not contest the next election because I think it will get harder. Not in the traditional, it's hard to run 4 terms. I think all things being equal, he has built, and Kory deserves a lot of credit, guys have built this durable political machine. More importantly, built this durable political brand for the government, built around Ford and economic focus that feels very solid to me and gives you a fetching chance at winning a 4th majority government. And it's a smaller duration. It's not like we've had him for 15 years, so you can see how maybe you might be tempted to go for it. I do think that there's going to be conduct issues that will intervene. I think there will be X factors that will intervene. I think some of these investigations, I think some of these issues are going to come back to haunt you. I think it's going to be harder. I think it's going to be kind of like the end of the Chrétien era. Like I think you're going to start getting picked away at by independent officers of parliament, of the legislature, reports, scrutiny about expenditures, the way in which deals get midwifed, all that kind of stuff, RCMP Green, all that sort of shit. And it's going to make it more attractive to leave than it will be to try to stay. So that's my reason why I think Ford's leaving, not because it's impossible to win 4 times in a row. I think you guys have a shot at it. The other thing I would say is, for Bonnie, I agree with you. I think she probably will contest the next election. It's interesting. They're moving pretty rapidly. Got the executive to endorse her this weekend. She indicated that she wanted, like I sent a note. Kory and I were together at PC headquarters on election night, and I was doing coverage. I sent a note immediately to Bonnie's people before she'd spoken. Do I go on TV and say she absolutely intends to run again, stay as leader? Yep, absolutely. You can say that because she's going to say that. She's going to be emphatic, and she was. And so they seem to be trying to squelch any pushback. And I think it will work because largely I'm not certain anybody's organized or motivated sufficiently to try to take the mantle away from her. But I don't think that's smart. Like, I think if I was opportunistic, I had political drive, and I would see opportunity in taking on a 30% political operation that's still quite nascent, and I could add a lot of pieces to. There's a real fetching opportunity that person could compete to be premier in the next election. So theoretically, I think her position is vulnerable. I think practically speaking, it's solid. If I was her, I would continue to keep a good, firm eye over my shoulder, though, and make certain I beat back any hint of challenge. And I would be ruthless in beating back any hint of challenge, because I think if it took root, it could spread fast.
Well, I think the Liberal establishment there agrees with you. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the executive come so quickly to consolidate around her leadership this weekend. Look, I think she's toast. I really do. I don't think it's survivable. I think that the hardest days are ahead for Crombie. Look, she didn't win a single seat in Peel. Like, it's her offer in terms of what she was going to be able to bring in her leadership did not come to fruition.
This is the Mulcair analysis, by the way, Kim.
Yeah. We cross occasionally in the night, Tom and I.
Where do you stand on Jean Charest versus Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah. No, but I mean, seriously, look, I think, and look, plenty of New Democrats will tell you that having party status is no guarantee that you're going to rehabilitate the party organization. There's still a lot of ways to go sideways in that. And I think, though, the most damaging thing is that 4 years is a very long time to be out of the legislature as leader. And there's going to be a ton of pressure on her to get into the legislature. So who of those 14 MPPs is going to give up their seat? She's going to have pressure to run in every single by-election that comes up that may not be in places that are remote. In fact, almost certainly will be in places that are not remotely favorable to her. I think that there is a lot of time for somebody or multiple somebodies to come out of the woodwork and consolidate unhappiness around her leadership. I think that what you're seeing right now in terms of people coming to her defense and a real institutional effort to consolidate her leadership is actually a reflection of weakness. And I don't think she stays. I don't think she's around for the next one. I think Stiles will definitely be given another chance. There was enough there. Like her conduct in the campaign was good. The party really does see that when people are introduced to her, they like her. So now they just need to do the first job. So I think that people feel quite solidly that that she's an asset. And as for Ford, I think he Brad Walls it out of here. I really do. I think that what we're seeing, and Kyla, I think, did a great job putting this argument down on paper a couple of weeks back. But what we're seeing right now in terms of a sort of slow but steady erosion in his own numbers, in terms of time for change, in terms of his negatives, like that can be hard to reverse. And we're already in a place where even though he won this, which is it is a historic win, but the fundamentals underneath, as we've talked about many times, are not great. And I think that Ford is ambitious. I think his ambitions are not limited to Ontario. And so there may be some thought on his part to get out before things go south here in order to preserve his ability to maybe do something at the federal level. So I don't think he will be there to contest the next election. And I think that would be for him a decision to try to preserve his own political strength for future projects.
Yeah, Jordan, if Poilievre were to lose, and nobody's betting on that right now, but if Poilievre were to lose, the party might suddenly get interested in Fordism after a while of deriding it for its lack of principle.
Boy, and I think that, in that scenario, in the scenario in which this strategy that Poilievre had that looked so surefire but was so polarizing, if that goes belly up, then I think Ford starts to look extremely appealing to federal conservatives.
So most people in the world don't get this, but I'm guessing most of you out there in Canada will. You know when it gets cold, and I mean really cold, dangerous cold, the kind of cold that bites at exposed flesh like a piranha and shocks lungs and makes your fingers hurt inside your gloves and stiffens and attacks anything mechanical and generally makes life miserable. Okay? Now imagine trying to run a steel and iron behemoth weighing tens of thousands of tons on steel wheels rolling on steel tracks through that kind of cold, out there in the northern wilderness, day in and day out, trying to make sure everything is still running on time. That is what our sponsor CN is doing right now and has been doing for more than a century. Cold assaults hydraulic brake hoses. So CN spaces special cars along the length of the train to boost air pressure and keep everyone safe. Cold forms crystals on steel, which can deform and crack wheels and tracks. So CN runs high-tech sensors, examining them in real time as the train rolls. Heavy snow fouls tracks and switchers, so CN installs ice melters and is constantly plowing. Heavy snow feeds avalanches, so CN employs weather and geological experts to monitor mountains and bridges. And of course, CN crews face the constant threat of hypothermia and frostbite. Railways measure cold in tiers. Down to 25 below, Tier 1. Down to 31 below, Tier 2. Past 33 below, Tier 3. And it's been a nasty winter. Already more tiered days than the last 2 years combined. My point is that while we sleep and work, thousands of CN railroaders head out to battle some of the coldest weather on Earth. And they do it because they are professionals and they know they keep the economy moving. That probably deserves a thank you. Oh, also, I think Polar Vortex sounds like a model of snowmobile. That's all. Kory, what do you think about this?
Yeah, well, I think there's a good chance that you see all three in the next election. But I'm not sure that that's wise. But if you're asking, do I think there's a desire of all three of them to continue to run as long as they're able? I think the answer to that is yes, in my assessment. And I don't think there are motivated groups to remove any of them. And And so, yeah, I think there's a very good chance you actually see all three run again. Now, that said, I'm a little more with Jordan on the viability of Bonnie as a candidate, but as like a
now that the election's over, Kory, do you think she's as bad a candidate as you portrayed her to be in the election and before?
I think she's worse. Like, not only did she not win a seat in Mississauga, she, her own personal seat, which was the best of the ridings to run in, she lost by more than many of the others. Like it's a damning indictment of her leadership. And I think the campaign was very poorly run. I credit much of the lift of the Liberals, but we'll talk about this more tomorrow. It's got nothing to do with their campaign. It has to do with the removal
growing federal Liberal support,
removal of Justin Trudeau from the ballot, because he was basically on the ballot everywhere the Liberals were running. If you were to go door knocking in, say, Belleville, near and dear to Scott's heart during the by-election that we had about a year ago, less than a year ago, 7 months ago. The first thing you'd hear at every doorstep is "fuck off, Justin Trudeau." Like that was the universal refrain at almost every door you'd go to in the riding. You wouldn't have heard that at a single door in this election. And a totally different frame. I think she should be sending bouquets of roses to Mark Carney more than anything else.
I think she kind of did.
Well, she did, but and look, there's some cleverness in that particular tactic. You guys debated it on the show, but I think it was very smart for them to do so. There's a lot of the province that didn't know her very well, but the part of the province that did gave her a 2 gigantic fucking thumbs down. And I don't think her performance during the debates was good. I think she came across as a bit of a see you next Tuesday to a lot of viewers, especially in comparison to Mart Stiles, who I think has a bigger future. If the comparison in a progressive primary is which one of these two people is likable, and do you see as having better leadership attributes, I think Mart wins that 10 times out of 10. But we'll see, I guess, right? Like the challenge that Mart had is almost the reverse. She had the millstone of Jagmeet Singh tied around her ankle. It was going about as well for her swimming across the lake as it has for David Eby and countless other NDP leaders at the provincial level. Well, remember our dinner with Carla in Saskatchewan. Singh and the federal NDP, were touched with the leprosy of Justin Trudeau and infected quite badly, and the limbs are falling off their body.
Like Robert the Bruce's father.
Well, I'll note that David Eby continues to walk the earth. So
yeah, well, but barely. Like, and they had they had to jettison the party basically, and look at what they had to get Singh to do in order to get Wab Kinew across the line. They had to tear up the confidence and supply agreement in spectacular public fashion in order to distance themselves. So, like, I think it's a problem in reverse. So, I think Bonnie benefited from a surge in support for the Liberals federally, and I think Mart was held down. Despite I think being a stronger political athlete by a very unpopular party brand.
One thing's for sure, the NDP cannot afford another election as successful as this one.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, okay, all right. Let's not try to fucking grade it on a curve for Bonnie Crombie here. Like,
well, there's no curve. You don't need a curve to grade. When you lose a bunch of votes and the percentage of support for the party going down, like this is
Look,
This is an existential problem.
I
for NDP.
agree. I agree that the popular vote, like that is, they have got to tend to that for sure. But the best way to do that is they need to be positioning themselves clearly as running for government, as firmly in second place before the writ next time. That is the best way to defeat the strategic voting stuff that's plaguing them here.
Well, they're not running for government is the problem, right? You can't run for government at 18%. You've got to get your percentage numbers up to where they were like in the preceding two elections.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, folks, since the writ first dropped, our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, has been asking all four political parties to help save the dream of home ownership. Because even at a time when home ownership rates are on the decline, we know the desire to own a home remains strong, and we need more homes and more affordable choices to make that happen. That's why the next government at Queen's Park must embrace housing as a core issue and implement bold actions to increase supply, improve consumer protections, and lower the cost of housing across the province. Whether we're talking about ending exclusionary zoning, improving the efficiency of the landlord and tenant board, or limiting municipal development charges, the actions needed to keep the Canadian dream of home ownership alive are out there, and we need decision makers to embrace them. To read OREA's full 2025 Ontario election platform, A Home for Everyone 2025, visit orea.com/platform. All right, let's move on to the federal scene, because we promised people that we would. I'm going to start with the clipping from Aaron Wary in CBC.ca, and let me read a short excerpt from it. A Mark Carney-led government's fiscal policy will focus first on reining in wasteful and ineffective government spending, the Carney campaign says. We will cut bureaucracy, consultants, corporate welfare, foreign aid, and other wasted money, Poilievre said last week. If there happens to be a secret file marked waste hiding somewhere in the Privy Council office, the next Prime Minister will have a fairly easy time figuring out what to cast aside. Failing that, the task of further reining in federal spending might be easier said than done. According to a policy backgrounder released by the Carney campaign, while we will review operating spending, transfers to individuals, i.e. pension and elderly benefits, employment insurance, child benefits, GST credits, and disability savings grants, and transfers to provinces and territories, Equalization Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, will be maintained. Poilievre has said Conservatives don't want to cut transfers to people and provinces, but he's also cast doubt on dental care and pharmacare programs. He's also previously criticized the new federal school food program, which 6 provinces are now accessing. These are not abstract questions, not just because transfers to individuals and provinces account for more than 40% of all federal spending, but because the programs directly impact Canadians. So, my question, I'm going to start with you, Jordan. The way I'm going to kick this off is, I've only been watching federal elections closely for 46 years. And I have never seen the Liberal Party run on a platform of cutting spending. Never once. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, I mean, I would agree with you. I think we certainly usually see a flash left, govern right on that. And so my paltry years of following federal elections would agree with you there. But look, I mean, I was really struck by this piece, and I think I'm going to make an argument that's going to be unpopular with everybody here. But I think this is a super bizarre race that we're happening at this point between two parties over who's going to cut more, at a time when we're facing economic catastrophe from tariffs that are just going to logically necessitate more spending. I think this is an argument divorced from that reality, and it leaves the impression, or at least, it risks leaving the impression, I think, that both the Conservatives and the Liberals want to somehow fight this war on the cheap. And I'm struck, all of the calls for shrinking of the public service and whatever. And I know it's sort of accepted wisdom now that the public service has ballooned since COVID, but I'm sure you guys know this too, but on a per capita basis, it's about the same as it was under Harper. And actually, it's smaller than it was in the 80s. And guess what? When you're in the middle of an economic crisis, who delivers all of the help to individuals, all of the help to industry, all of the support for businesses? Well, it's your fucking public service. So I don't actually see a lot of prospect. Yes, I can see Kory's just losing his mind in the box over there. I don't see a lot of prospect really as the rubber hits the road on this tariff fights to actually squeeze blood out of that particular stone. Although if they want to go in and cut all of the consultants, I think that that's going to go interestingly for them, because if you're simultaneously trying to cut capacity in the federal public service and cut the consultants, like, good luck to you. But look, I think the other thing that I see here that is an interesting dynamic that's emerging is that Poilievre has been pretty clear now. Over the last few months, clarity has developed over what he's going to cut. And we can like that or not like that, but we know that dental care is on the chopping block. We know he would cut pharmacare. We know that he would go after the housing funding. We know he would cut CBC. We know what he's talking about eliminating out of the federal budget, and people can make a voting decision around that. But Carney is not being clear. Like, he's talking about broad swaths of unspecified efficiencies where we don't know what the impacts of that are going to be. We don't know what that means. And that actually does remind me a bit of Harper. We've seen that movie before. And I really think that is a potential vulnerability there. We can't fight this tariff war on the cheap. And I do think that there's a risk here that as we're in this crisis, like, yes, we need to be prudent about our finances. There's no question about that. But the notion that we need to balance the books on an artificial timeline in the middle of an economic crisis, I think there's a real risk that it's actually Canadians, it's workers, it's businesses that could end up paying the price for that. And so that's my rant there.
Scott?
I think that it's a mistake to think that what Carney is doing is setting up a dynamic where the Liberal Party will be running on a program of spending cuts or spending reduction. I don't think that's what's actually going on. I don't think that's what will happen. I think they're doing two things, one of which I think is clever, one of which I think could be a mistake. The first and most fundamental thing they're doing is they're differentiating for both Trudeau and Poilievre. And so when there will be a clash during an election campaign, when there will be a sharp difference between Poilievre and Carney, it will be over something that Poilievre wants to cut that Carney will not. So Carney is positioning himself, in my view, he's differentiating himself, first of all, with this kind of vague language. We're going to preserve these things, but we're going to come in with an accountant's visor and a blue pencil, and we're going to go over every expenditure, and we're going to extract efficiencies. He's differentiating himself in that respect from Trudeau. He's trying to send a signal that, and it's in keeping with building up this idea of the Carney brand, which is this is a sensible, more disciplined, tighter operation leader. And that all makes sense. Then I think what's going to happen in practice is that will allow them to say, well, listen, we are for sure going to find efficiencies and get rid of stupidity and stamp out on waste. And we're going to borrow from the Paul Martin era when they did a rigorous and thorough and effective program review, not just say they're going to look at stuff, but actually go in there and root through every treasure chest. We're going to do that. But what we're not going to do is what Mr. Poilievre was purporting to do on these two or three spending items, which we think are emblematic of why, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's where this is going to end up. And so they won't be positioned as we're going to spend. They'll try to get a vague benefit of being more disciplined, and then there'll be a cleavage on something or a couple of somethings. So that's the first thing. I think the second, and I think that probably, if they can pull it off, that's probably sensible positioning. It's not easy, but Ford did it. To be honest with you, presented himself as a fiscal hawk, but as somebody who's going to be more disciplined, more businesslike in his operations and his approach to government. Promised that in 2018, talked about they're going to get rid of all the inefficiencies and all that kind of stuff. And it all amounted to sweet fuck all. And, it's a big spending government. Where I think it gets problematic is this, and we've talked about it before, to add to that, the distinction between operating and capital budgets. I think that degree of specificity can draw you into difficulty, and people will start saying, okay, well, I'd like you to actually, here's a list of 11 items. I'd like you to tell me which category they fit into. And he may open himself up to challenges on that front. But I can see why the positioning makes sense. Position yourself as more sensible and a better manager than Trudeau, but not the cookie-eyed monster, crazy cutting son of a gun that Poilievre is, as evidenced by items 1, 2, and 3.
So, Kory, before you state, let me have a little preamble to this.
Sure.
Because I disagree with Scott a fair bit. First thing is, polling I look at tells me that only about 30% of Canadians care about the deficit at all, and they are all part of the conservative base, not marginal conservative voters, part of the conservative base. Second of all, as frequently as the Liberals have not run on spending cuts, they have accused the Conservatives of a hidden agenda on spending cuts. Every election, the Liberals say, the Conservatives say they're going to balance the budget. They won't tell you how. I'll tell you how. They're going to cut healthcare. That is the basic Liberal message. Okay? And I believe that this positioning that Scott is admiring takes that off the table, because Carney has as much of a hidden agenda on this as anybody else does. He's going to balance the operating budget. He says he's not going to cut anything that you've ever heard of. That is suspicious, especially when there's other expenses coming down the pipe, whether it be military or otherwise. So I think this may be what's necessary in the current environment for him to portray, but it is not the traditional Liberal playbook for sure. And I'm not talking about traditional Trudeau Liberal playbook. I'm talking about the traditional Liberal playbook.
Well, it's a good preamble. Can I go from the preamble to a story, because and probably one that you've heard before. You know the story of the half dozen folks standing around the water cooler at the Department of Agriculture, and they're all sobbing and crying and consoling one another. And one of their other colleagues walks up and says, "What's going on? Why are you guys so upset?" And they say, "Well, our farmer died." And and I think that is in keeping with the I don't think it is just stereotypical, but I think a perception of a lot of people out there across the country as to how much benefit they get out of public servants with jobs in Ottawa that have been rising by like 6 points a year in a country with economic growth between 1.5 and 3. So I don't think people see the value in a lot of the stuff that's going on in Ottawa. I think they do see waste. I think they see examples of waste like the ArriveCan app and things like that. And for people to say that there's nothing that can be done better in Ottawa is to have never visited Ottawa or looked at anything going on in Ottawa. Of course, there's a lot of things that you can do better. That said, I don't think anyone's going to be talking about balancing the budget and fiscal discipline in this next campaign. I don't think the Conservatives are going to. I don't think they are right now. They're talking about fixing the budget, not balancing the budget. And I don't think the Liberals are going to want to either. I think the thing that's going to be front and center, well, are the couple things. One is affordability and things related to that. And the other is going to be the giant orange hurricane blowing up our direction from Florida. And, I think those are the two things that the election is going to be about. And anyone who wants to talk about anything else, like if people want to talk about cuts and all that, good luck. I hope you do it as well protecting your seats as Marit Stiles did, because that's the game you're going to be playing. The election's going to be decided on those other two things.
Hey, David, can I reply quickly to your preamble?
Yeah,
because I don't disagree with you. But it's why I don't think the positioning inherently means or should mean that Carney is presenting himself as prioritizing deficit reduction. I think where that danger arises is when you take the additional step of getting into the operational versus capital spending and how you're going to, that's what carries you into it. And that's why I worry about that. I think the specificity of that raises more specific questions, puts pressure on you, and then you do run the risk of getting into that kind of discussion. It carries you down that rabbit hole. So,
But Scott, even answering that question and like talking about that at all, is like demonstrating that you're campaigning for the endorsement of Andrew Coyne as opposed to actual voters.
I think
but that's why I wouldn't do it. I think it's concocted in a management consultant boardroom.
Honestly,
and it's
I
a
feel
bad
like this sounds really great to the business community, but I got to tell you, like the 1995 budget is not the fucking clarion call among voters that I think that many people on that campaign think it is. Like, the devastation to social programs, to housing spending, like all of that. There's a lot of space, particularly because they have committed to that timeline, to balancing the books. There's a lot that can be read into what would need to be cut, what would need to be on the table in order to achieve that. And I think that by forefronting the plan that they've put out there, and particularly doing it in a way that is impossible to explain to regular people with the split between operating and capital expenditure, I think they've left themselves wide open on that.
Haven't they written the NDP campaign? I mean, surely.
Totally.
If you look at the growth in Liberal support since Trudeau stepped down has been as much from collapsing NDP vote as it has been from pulling voters away from the Conservatives. Conservative votes held reasonably well, but the NDP vote has not held well. But surely this gives them an argument.
And I think we should, it bears looking at past Liberal leadership bounces that came at the expense of the NDP, because we've seen this movie, right? It happened with Dion, it happened with Ignatieff, it happened with Trudeau, but Trudeau held that bounce. He kept those numbers because he was able to pitch himself to that slice of the electorate in a durable way. Carney is not setting himself up to keep those voters.
One of the things that happens in leaderships, which is interesting, and his campaign will hate to hear this because it sounds smug, and I'm the wise old owl and I've seen it all because I have gray hair. But one of the things that happens in leadership contests is candidates they'll come up with constructs and they like them and they go, okay, this makes me feel comfortable. I feel like I have my legs under me. You see it happen all the time. So they'll come up with a priority or a phraseology that they think helps capture sort of their approach and so on and so forth. Or
catalyze, if you will.
And then they'll move away from it as they become the leader and they realize, or they become premier as well, or prime minister, and they realize they have to. So I think spend less, invest more is the kind of haiku that makes you feel like, I think that captures what I'm thinking of. It's in concept, but then it's the kind of thing that you feel like, maybe this is not actually working for me. The challenge that Carney's going to have is that he has no time to move away from that, right? Like that, because he's not going to get a year in office where, okay, and then be like, we'll look back on it and go, oh God, remember that kind of faded, right? That disappeared in the background. Because he's probably going to be forced into an election the next month. So I think you're going to have to take a hard choice on it.
But all of this is just so off the topic in terms of where the electorate is. You guys are arguing about campaigns in the 90s and campaigns you'd like to be fighting. That's not the campaign that people are going to be fighting. That's not the campaign they're going to be fighting. You're going to be fighting a campaign around economic nationalism, not around all the new public spending and universal programs and fucking dental care for dogs or something. Like you can talk about all the new programs you want till the cows come home. The reality is going to be, we are going to have an economy incapable of supporting what we're doing today, let alone anything new. And we are going to have people spending more money across the board, not because there's some new program, but because automatic payments for things like EI are going to go straight fucking vertical to the moon. And that is what we're going to be dealing with. And what is it we're going to be investing in? It's going to be in as much as, the NIMBY green-haired folks in the environmental community who either are supporting the Greens or the NDP, they're going to be all lining up to get out a pickaxe and start building a pipeline to Tidewater, because that is going to be called economic continued existence. Like the issue set is going to be so different than what you guys are talking about. I just think you're missing the play in terms of what just happened in the election here and why the numbers are changing so radically right now in federal polling.
Well, if that's true, then that all works to the favor of Carney. That all works to the favor of Carney, because what you're saying is all this stuff is chicken shit detail. What really is going to matter is Trump and the response to Trump, and Carney has some broad advantages here.
I agree that he has some advantages. We're about to see whether or not he has enough game to be able to fully capitalize on them. But if we're to look at things that have happened of consequence, in my absence, well, the Conservatives are down considerably, the Liberals are up considerably. What is that on the basis of? Is it about talking about spending cuts, or is it about Trump? It's about Trump.
That's a good point. Could you go away for 3 more months?
But what, where's the only counterpunch that I've seen that's landed, despite a few different attempts by the Conservatives to reposition, is Brookfield moving jobs to the U.S. Right. So, what is the back and forth that's going on, that's moving numbers, that's defining the political race right now? It's not about any of this shit. So, like the historic playbooks around this, I think are a really poor guide to where the road's going, right? Like, it's straight into the fucking swamp, guys. And, it's not going to be the same as previous elections. And we're not going to have to wait long, I think, to find out. Like, I think by this time next week, we could be in a campaign.
All right. So
that's interesting.
It is interesting. So that's a good springboard to our last topic, which we'll have to wedge into a few minutes here. But Canadian nationalism clearly on the rise, Trump becoming more and more threatening. After Zelensky on Friday, there can't be anybody left who thinks that if you can just get in a room with Trump, you can have a rational conversation and persuade him of your case. So who is best to deal with him becomes less a mano thing and more a strategic thing. Poilievre and Carney are both trying to take this territory. Kory, who do you think has the advantage right now?
Well, I think it's the wrong question. It's not who to deal with him. It's who can work past him. Like, I don't think anyone believes anyone is going to go in there and deal with him. And, what I think you're seeing is a complete rejection of Trump. And I think where Poilievre is really being, taking it on the chin is endorsements from Elon Musk. I think every time Musk puts out a tweet saying something nice about Poilievre, he goes down 2 points. Like, it's, and I think some of the personal presentation, is a little too Trumpian for folks. And I think any amount of proximity to Trump right now, I think is radioactive to the point that, it kills the patient, kills the person standing near. I think it's just so toxic that's what's defining things. So I don't think it's like that. Oh, who can go down and cut a deal with this guy? You want to see what cutting a deal with him looks like? Watch the media avail the other day with Zelensky. Good luck. Good fucking luck. Like, it's what are you going to do to position the Canadian economy to get through this, despite the fact that you will have no deal with Trump. Even if you sign a deal with Trump, as Canada did not that long ago, the CUSMA agreement is not something that, Trump inherited. It's his own fucking deal. How is that working out? Trump will not respect a deal for 2 minutes past the moment he signed it. So, so once you accept that premise, which I don't, is, I think, borne out by reality, in Technicolor, you have to figure out, what are you going to do despite Trump? What is Europe doing right now? They're figuring out how to react to Russia, despite the fact that the Americans are not going to be there. And even if you get a deal with them, it's not a reliable deal. It's not a deal that might last the day, let alone the week, let alone the month, let alone its term of office. I think that's just where we're at. So it's a different question, right?
So, Scott, if the terms of the debate are as Kory just outlined them, I don't see how Carney does not have a significant advantage with his background.
I agree with
looking like the person that can understand what's going on in Europe and be part of that and build those international alliances and scope out an economy. I mean, Poilievre has the pugilist side of this down, right? So he could portray himself as the uber defender, but he's not really ever established the credentials of that kind of architect or that kind of reach.
I agree with Kory's construction. I think it is increasingly about how to look past. The weekend was so much about looking past, right? How does Europe regalvanize itself as improbable and as unpleasant as it is, as unimaginable it is of trying to deal with a world where America is not present, or when it is present, it's just an disruptive force. But we watched it all weekend. We watched it with Zelensky, and then we watched it all weekend in Europe. I think Kory is right. And interestingly, and no one watched, I understand, but this was subtly a point of difference between Carney and Freeland in the leaders debate, because she kept saying we can't give up on negotiating. But then Carney didn't say we should, but more or less he was like, we got to get on with the world order beyond that. We got to figure out what Canada's interests are if we can't count on this guy. And let's face it, you can never count on this fucking guy. He could say something on Tuesday and it doesn't mean dick, because by Wednesday he will have changed his mind 3 times. And I think tomorrow, we're recording this on Monday, Tuesday is the day that tariffs are supposed to be imposed. I think Tuesday is going to reinforce that, because I don't think we'll get those across the board tariffs. I think we'll get something shy of that. It'll be a 10% tariff across the board with a threat that if you say something wrong or you do something I don't like, it will go up to 25%. Or it'll be further rolled into a consideration of the full one. And it keeps pushing the deadlines down the road because he wants to maintain maximum leverage, maximum fear, maximum terror, that if we step out of line in terms of what we say politically, if we step out of line in terms of where we comment and do with respect to geopolitics, tax policy, foreign policy, trade policy, anything, that he'll use it as a lever on us. And I think actually what will happen is when we get jerked off again on Tuesday the 4th, I think people are going to say, we have to figure out how to insulate ourselves. We need to figure out how to build a political body of armor around ourselves. And I do think that Carney has some advantages in that. I think he has to be very careful about 2 things. One, making certain that he keeps the focus on that, which is why increasingly, and there were questions, I think, but why increasingly it does make sense to go early, or not early, but immediately, if you will, right? Go to the polls quite rapidly. Bank this improbable, unpredicted, I mean, it wasn't that unpredicted, even us, we were talking about it, but bank this potential advantage in this frame. And secondly, the second challenge, I think, is he's got to demonstrate some game in blowing off when blowing off is the right core, or addressing and killing when addressing and killing is the right call with respect to the conservative rebuttal. There's an ocean of conservative attacks coming at him, and I don't think they've been as nimble and agile at addressing him as they should have been. And that can cost you 4 days on an election campaign if you fuck that up, and take you away from being the anti-Trump and being not just the anti-Trump, but the post-Trump, the solution to Trump, the Trump antidote, right? Your Trump serum. Who's going to be Trump's serum? I don't think it's going to be Poilievre, or at least he's not well positioned to be that. Carney could be. But listen, then there's also the laws of political gravity, which is there's a lot of pent up desire for change. Carney is a newbie, all of these things. So us liberals can't get too frothy and think like this. Like literally, I talk to liberals now and they talk like, you know what, we're probably going to win this campaign, right? And you're like, you know what, have a drink and sleep on it. Okay, let's gear down. But the broad positioning, I agree with you. I think provided he can maintain it, fuel it, and avoid the pitfalls of 101 other challenges, I think advantage goes to Carney suddenly.
Jordan.
Well, I think it's still Poilievre's election to lose, but that is happening rapidly. And I think that the question is for Carney is the force of his wave of popularity as he's coming out of this leadership race, again, as we've talked about, still relatively untested. Is that enough to push change away as the ballot question? And I don't think that has happened yet, but we are approaching a moment where that could be happening. I think Poilievre is in big trouble, basically, because all sorts of structural elements, not just about his campaign, but about who he is as a leader, are bound up with being like a I mean, it's sort of a MAGA light, but like not in terms of the most egregious policies, but in terms of style. Like there's reams of footage of him out there just being a dick to people. There's, you know, the sort of pettiness, the smallness, all Scott's eating an apple there. All that stuff
Is
right now.
that what that was?
Totally.
Thank you, Jordan. She did correctly recognize. Yes, that was my attempt. I'm no mime.
All that is now is really just kryptonite to people. They don't want to see that. They don't want to have any truck or trade with that. And I think the challenge for him is it's not just about repositioning his campaign as we've seen him attempt to do. Like the dude needs a fucking personality transplant. That is very hard to do. Like this is actually kind of who he is as a person. And so that's going to be really tough. And the real enemy for the Conservatives is time right now, because there is absolutely, I think, the smart money and the right thing to do if you're Carney is to get in, call that election right away, ride that wave of momentum into the general quickly before you're under too much fire from Jenny, and try to consolidate what you've cannibalized from the NDP. Don't face the House. Don't start your tenure with a loss. Just get out there and get it done. And so I do think we're going to see a very short and tight race that just leaves even less space for Poilievre to maneuver and just be a different person effectively than he's been over the last 2 years that they've spent millions of dollars putting in front of people. And I think that I would maybe nuance a little bit the question, and again, I'm obviously approaching this from the center left and thinking about what it is that the NDP can do in this scenario, because it is going to be a very different campaign for them. They are going to be trying to save the furniture, and they have to try to carve out a space where they can talk about when, because tariffs and Trump is just such a garbage issue for them. They're not trusted really by anybody to be the lead people about how to handle that. And so that's why you're seeing, Singh out there doing things that are more attention getting, that are more about just strongly and stridently opposing Trump, because there is a section of the electorate for whom that is interesting. And that's about just sort of finding that slice and working with it. And they have to be able to say, look, there is, we are going to be facing this crisis. We are going to be, the question is, yes, about dealing with Trump, but it's about dealing with the impacts here at home. And it's about making sure that when these tariffs come down and when we're in this economic crisis, that you've got somebody there in Parliament who's going to be defending your interests, the interests of regular people, who's going to be taking care of you and your family and your community, and not allowing sort of big business to take advantage of this crisis and for deregulation and taking government money. Like, this is going to be about putting you and your family first. So they are going to have to figure out what is their particular argument and their particular path on that. And I think it's going to be a real challenge. But, I think the question that I have that is still unanswered, even as we are less than a week from the announcement of the new Liberal leader, is what are Carney's retail politics chops? I still don't know. This leadership race has not tested those in a sustained way. And I think that we have some evidence that his team and those around him and their instincts on managing some of the attacks that have come his way are not great. So to go back to the Brookfield example, which I think is I would agree that of the attacks, that's the one that has sort of landed so far. The initial statement that came from his campaign was very defensive and actually made no mention of the core issue. The core issue in that Brookfield story is not whether there were no jobs or 5 jobs or 6 jobs. It's did he lie? Did he lie? Because it goes to character. And I think that his team's clunkiness and how they've responded to that attack, and his personal chippiness when he gets asked about that by journalists, like not just about Brookfield, but about other issues, he can become very chippy and very defensive. That is also not a good look. So they have some work to do there, and they got to do it very fast.
Right here. All right. Speaking of very fast, the time has gone. Our time has flown. Kory comes back, and I'm telling you, the whole dynamic just shifts up, and everybody's got energy. It's great. Hey, yous, Mr. Pinsent.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's a keener that wants to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
Because it fits with the conversation we're just having. And it's a little bit of a sidecar to the conversation. But my hey you is to the Carney campaign. You got the leadership to win. Then you have to decide how you handle the days that follow, when and how you spring a campaign, whether you want to do something substantive in terms of introducing a statement of government policy outside of the House with respect to tariffs and replying to Trump, use that as a de facto platform. There's all sorts of things to do. One small thing that I would say, it's not small, but one additional thing, but make news. Make news every day. Use the natural engine of transition to make news on a daily basis. One of the best ways to blunt the attacks from the Conservatives and to maintain your position, reinforce your position, your brand, and your offering is to make news on a daily basis. Don't let 3-4 days go by where you're just kind of like, yeah, well, we're working away on stuff. Like, make news every day. One specific way that I would try to make news, demonstrate change by announcing 3, 5, 8 new, exciting, and interesting candidates. People that would not have run under Trudeau. People that would have had no interest in putting their name forward, but have been attracted to the... Huh?
Like Sasha?
Well, like bringing people... maybe not my number one.
I keep hearing Evan Solomon.
Oh my God, people.
But I like...
Let the dynasty rest.
You can generate some momentum and news and build a narrative, and it's going to be about Carney and it's going to be about Trump. But you can eat up days and demonstrate change and blunt attacks and blot out the news hole with that kind of stuff. So that's a little tactical suggestion.
All right.
I kept hearing Evan Solomon's name bouncing around as a star candidate. Have you guys heard that? Anyway, probably not fair to bring that out on the podcast here without having
I feel like Evan might have something to say about that.
Yeah, Evan will give you a call and you can tell me whether that's right or not.
Hey, you, Kory?
Sure. Well, I'll do a hey you to the Conservative campaign. They sort of came out in the middle of our campaign, but I really like the ads around this Brookfield stuff. And I think of all of the different, shoes they've tried on or attacks, they've worked up around tying them to carbon tax or any of that. Like, I get the strategy, and I would probably have tried to do all those things. But I actually thought the Brookfield one was really on target. I think that's the right attack vector for them. And so my hey you would be hey, I think that's on the money, and I would double and triple down on it.
Jordan.
Well, my hey you is to all parties. Can we just agree that the monarchy is useless? Like, can we just, this whole episode, I think, has pointed out just the sheer absurdity of having a head of state that's also the head of another state and who also can't say anything about the annexation of our country. And yes, before the constitutional lawyers come for me, I understand why that is the convention, yes, but that also underscores the stupidity of the whole thing. So I would hope that we could all just, once this tariff thing is over, maybe we could all just come to a quiet agreement that the next time that we feel lucky and reopen the Constitution, we could just take a little care of that.
I never thought I'd call Jordan a Republican, but I guess in this sense you are.
I am, yes.
I get why he isn't saying anything, I guess, but I don't get why he extended an invitation to a state visit.
Totally. The whole thing is just dumb.
Oh. My hey you is maybe a little thing, but I don't think so. To the Liberal Party, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence that people are having trouble voting. I
can't vote. I've failed to be able to get my vote in.
I've heard from so many people. It's a complicated process. Part of it is on the party's website. Then it kicks you over to a Canada Post app that you have to have downloaded to verify your identity and then go back to the party. There's a lot of connections that are getting lost in there. And I just know a lot of people, and Liberal support is silent. I know people that have asked for help days and days ago and heard nothing back. So I think if this goes on like this, it's going to both affect the turnout and perhaps the legitimacy of this thing. So I think on both the party and the candidates, get on this in terms of hands-on assistance for people voting, because I think it's a problem. All right. Thank you, all of you. Kory, it's great to have you back. And thanks to the three of you for being here today. Next time we meet, it will be in the aftermath of the Liberal leadership, so we'll have lots to chew on. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Telus, our sponsors, CN and OREA today, and all of you cursed out there. We're back federally, and probably more federal than you want over time. But anyway, thanks for joining us this morning, and we'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics.